Imagine you're walking through a crowded parking lot on a warm summer afternoon. A young man catches your attention. He's well-dressed, clean-cut, friendly. One of his arms is wrapped in a sling, and he's struggling to carry a stack of books. He smiles politely. "Excuse me, could you help me carry these to my car? It's just over there." Would you help him? Most people would, not because they're careless, but because that's exactly how empathy is supposed to work. And no one understood that better than Ted Bundy. He didn't threaten people. He didn't chase them. He made them choose to trust him. That was his greatest weapon. Born in 1946, Theodore Robert Bundy looked like the kind of man with a bright future ahead of him. He studied psychology at the University of Washington, volunteered at a crisis hotline helping strangers through their darkest moments, and impressed almost everyone who met him with his intelligence, confidence, and natural charm. Friends admired him. Co-workers respected him. His longtime girlfriend believed she had found the perfect partner. Even people who worked beside him later described him as warm, patient, and incredibly easy to trust. No one saw a monster. Because he didn't look like one. He looked like the man your parents would want you to date, the man your friends would instantly like, the man you'd never think twice about helping in a parking lot. That image wasn't an accident. Bundy spent years perfecting it. Every smile, every conversation, every first impression. He understood that people don't fear someone who makes them feel comfortable. They lower their guard, and once they do, it's already too late. Between 1974 and 1978, women across the United States began disappearing without a trace. College students, young professionals, women walking through places that felt completely safe in broad daylight. At first, no one believed the cases were connected. Different cities, different states, different victims. But investigators would eventually discover they were all being hunted by the same man. A man who never forced his way into anyone's life. He simply asked for a little help, and they never came home. The summer of 1974 was about to change America forever. The disappearances didn't begin in dark alleyways. They didn't happen in abandoned buildings. They happened in places where people felt completely safe. A university campus, a shopping center, a crowded beach on a sunny afternoon. That was what made them so terrifying. Young women simply vanished, one by one, with no witnesses, no obvious suspects, and almost no evidence linking the cases together. Then came July 14, 1974. Thousands of people filled Lake Sammamish State Park near Seattle, enjoying a warm summer day. Families were having picnics, children were swimming, boats covered the lake. It was the last place anyone expected a predator to be hunting. Yet throughout the afternoon, several women noticed the same handsome young man walking around the beach. His arm was in a sling. He introduced himself with one simple word. "Hi, I'm Ted." He smiled politely and explained that he needed help loading his sailboat onto his car. Some women apologized and walked away. Others almost agreed. But two women accepted. Janice Ott, Denise Nasland. Neither of them ever returned home. Months later, investigators discovered their remains miles away from the park. Suddenly, every woman who had spoken to the young man remembered the same details. The sling, the books, the name. Ted. Detectives worked quickly to create a composite sketch. When it was released to the public, thousands of people across Washington recognized the face. Several callers even gave investigators the same name, Ted Bundy. He wasn't hiding. He had a stable job. He attended college. He volunteered in his community. Police brought him in for questioning. He answered every question calmly. He smiled, cooperated, made eye contact, and walked back out the front door. Investigators crossed his name off the suspect list because he simply didn't look like the man they were searching for. That single mistake would cost countless lives. Before the year was over, Ted Bundy packed his belongings and moved to Utah to study law. As the disappearances in Washington slowed, a new wave of missing women began hundreds of miles away. The nightmare wasn't over. It had simply changed states. By the end of 1974, investigators knew they were searching for one man. What they didn't understand was how he kept convincing intelligent, careful women to willingly walk toward him. The answer was surprisingly simple. Ted Bundy never looked dangerous. He looked like someone who needed help. Some days he wore a cast, other days an arm sling. Sometimes he carried heavy books. Sometimes he struggled to load a sailboat onto his car. The details changed, but the strategy never did. He wasn't targeting weakness, he was targeting kindness. Because when someone asks for help, your instincts don't tell you to run. They tell you to stop, to listen, to help. And Bundy knew exactly how long that moment lasted. Just a few seconds. That was all he needed. He also knew the power of first impressions. He introduced himself as a law student. Sometimes he hinted that he worked in medicine. He spoke with confidence, maintained calm eye contact, never rushed, never appeared nervous. Everything about him communicated one message: you can trust me. And people did. There was another piece of the puzzle that investigators wouldn't fully understand until much later: his Volkswagen Beetle. It looked like an ordinary car, but Bundy had quietly removed the passenger seat. Once someone stepped inside, the space worked against them. By the time they realized something wasn't right, getting back out became far more difficult. While detectives in Washington searched for answers, Bundy was already committing crimes hundreds of miles away. Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado. Each state had its own investigators, its own files, its own suspects. Almost no one was connecting the cases. Bundy understood that better than anyone. Every time pressure increased in one state, he simply crossed a border, and the hunt started all over again. For years, he stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. Not because he was invisible, but because the system wasn't built to chase someone who refused to stay in one place. Eventually, that would change. But before investigators could catch him, Ted Bundy would do something almost impossible to believe. He wouldn't escape the police. He would escape them twice. By 1977, Ted Bundy was finally behind bars. After years of crossing state lines and leaving investigators chasing shadows, it seemed the nightmare was finally over. It wasn't. Because Bundy wasn't just planning his defense, he was planning his escape. And somehow, he would succeed. Not once, but twice. The first escape happened inside a courthouse in Aspen, Colorado. Bundy had convinced the court to let him assist with his own legal defense, giving him access to the courthouse library. He had already studied the building, measured distances, even lost weight on purpose to make what came next possible. During a break, he quietly opened a second-floor window and jumped. By the time anyone realized he was gone, Ted Bundy had disappeared into the Colorado mountains. For nearly a week, police searched forests, roads, and abandoned cabins before finally finding him, exhausted, cold, and trying to steal a vehicle. He was captured, returned to jail, and this time, authorities believed there was no chance he could escape again. They were wrong. While locked inside his cell, Bundy patiently worked in secret. Night after night, he cut a small opening in the ceiling above his bed. He continued losing weight until his body was thin enough to squeeze through the narrow space. Then, just days before Christmas, he climbed into the ceiling, crawled above the jail unnoticed, dropped into the empty apartment of the jailer, walked out the front door, and vanished. It took officers more than 15 hours to realize he was gone. By then, Ted Bundy was already on his way across the country. Using stolen identification and false names, he traveled to Florida, where no one recognized his face. Within weeks, he attacked the Chi Omega sorority house near Florida State University, killing 2 young women and seriously injuring 2 others. Only weeks later, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The man who should have been locked inside a prison cell had become even more dangerous than before. His freedom finally ended in February 1978, when a patrol officer stopped a suspicious stolen vehicle. The driver gave a false name, but something didn't feel right. The officer looked closer, made a phone call, and realized the man sitting in front of him wasn't just another car thief. It was the most wanted fugitive in America. This time, Ted Bundy wasn't getting away again. When Ted Bundy walked into a Miami courtroom in 1979, the trial became something America had never seen before. Television cameras filled the room, newspapers covered every hearing, millions of people watched from their living rooms. For the first time, a murder trial had become national television, and Bundy loved every second of it. He didn't behave like a man fighting for his life. He behaved like a man performing on a stage. Instead of staying silent, he chose to represent himself. He questioned witnesses, argued with prosecutors, addressed the jury with the calm confidence that had fooled so many people before. If someone had walked into the courtroom without knowing who he was, they might have mistaken him for one of the lawyers. That was part of the horror. Even surrounded by overwhelming evidence, he still looked believable. Letters poured into the courthouse from women across the country. Some insisted he was innocent. Others said they had fallen in love with him after watching him on television. One supporter, Carol Ann Boone, stood beside him throughout the trial. During one hearing, Bundy did something almost unbelievable. He proposed to her, right there in the courtroom. She accepted. Under Florida law at the time, the declaration was legally recognized as a marriage. Even after everything that had been revealed, someone still believed him. Someone still trusted him. Eventually, the jury returned. The verdict was guilty. Ted Bundy was sentenced to death. But even then, he wasn't ready to stop controlling the story. Over the next 10 years on death row, he filed appeals, gave interviews, and continued denying parts of the evidence. Only in the final days before his execution did he begin confessing. Not because investigators believed he felt remorse, but because every new confession bought him a little more time. He admitted to 30 murders across multiple states, then hinted there were more. How many more? No one has ever known. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida. Outside the prison, crowds gathered before sunrise. Some held signs, some celebrated. Others simply wanted to witness the end of the man who had terrified America for more than a decade. But even after his death, one question refused to disappear. How could someone capable of such unimaginable violence also be someone so many people genuinely trusted? For decades, investigators searched for one answer. Not how Ted Bundy committed his crimes, but why so many people trusted him. Because when people imagine a serial killer, they picture someone who looks dangerous, someone who stands out, someone who makes you feel afraid the moment you see them. Ted Bundy was the exact opposite. That was his greatest deception. Long before his arrest, Bundy volunteered at a crisis hotline in Seattle. Night after night, strangers called in their darkest moments, people overwhelmed by fear, grief, loneliness, or thoughts of ending their own lives. Bundy listened. He stayed calm. He knew exactly what to say. His co-workers later described him as one of the most compassionate volunteers they had ever worked with. One of those co-workers was Ann Rule, who would later become one of America's most respected true crime writers. She had worked beside Bundy for years. She trusted him. She considered him a friend. When his face appeared on television after the arrests, she couldn't believe it. Not because the evidence was weak, but because it was almost impossible to reconcile the man she knew with the crimes he had committed. That contradiction is what still haunts the Bundy case today. The same voice that comforted desperate strangers over the phone was the voice that convinced victims to lower their guard. The same charm that made people feel safe made them vulnerable. He didn't become successful because people ignored warning signs. He became successful because he rarely gave them one. His case permanently changed the way law enforcement worked across the United States. Police departments began sharing information across state lines far more effectively. Behavioral profiling became a far more important investigative tool, and generations of women grew up hearing the same lesson. The most dangerous person isn't always the one who looks dangerous. Sometimes it's the one smiling politely, the one asking for a small favor, the one carrying a stack of books with one arm in a sling. Ted Bundy understood human trust better than almost anyone. He could have spent his life using that gift to save people. Instead, he used it to destroy lives. And that's why, decades later, the Ted Bundy case isn't remembered simply because of the number of victims. It's remembered because it forced the world to confront a terrifying truth. Evil doesn't always hide behind a frightening face. Sometimes, it looks exactly like the person you'd stop to help.